later, didn't you? Was it Paul or you took Camille to France, right? When she did her year abroad. Yeah, I remember that. Paul's interest in learning never abated, and the girls, that is Lucy and Roberta, were very surprised to find out that at some point in the middle of his second career, right? He had been a chemical engineer and now he is a physician. Paul contemplated becoming an attorney and actually took the LSAT. And I don't know that he followed up on it, but he said he did very well and could have gone to any law school that he desired to go to. He also took a real estate license. There was many, many facets to Paul that, those of us who knew him in his retirement, we didn't know all of these other things were going on. Lots of stuff going on. The family was very close with Friday dinners and Sunday dinners. And when the first grandkids came along and the grandparents were young and healthy relatively, they were so involved with picking up and dropping off and all of that good stuff that you get to do when you're retired and your children live nearby. And it's such, as we say in French, no French word, a mechaya, to raise a second family and to see these children grow. And they were such a pleasure for Paul and Essie. There was never a minute that they were bored or imposed upon or in any way other than just delighted to be around these children. Camille remembers Paul picking her up or taking her somewhere, I don't recall where exactly, and she's sitting on a little seat and with a little belt, and she was so thrilled, and she said, "Grandpa, this is the first time you ever took me out without Grandma." And she was 3 years old. And I'm sure there were thousands and thousands of those moments over the next 20 or so years with these grandchildren. I have a little story, I guess, about Lindsay. I know what it is. It's you, Lucy. It's you. When Lindsay was a really small girl, and you were so tired, and it was such a slog, to do everything that had to get done for a new child, and you're a very good athlete. You like to swim, and you guys had a science. You had it down to a science that you would get the baby and put her in the car and get over to your parents' house and time it so the baby had to be fed, and then she would go to sleep, and then your parents would mind her until you were in the pool swimming. And that's the kind of symbiotic relationship that they had, that they all worked together in a sense as a team to raise these kids and to support their children. This is the kind of thing that Essie and Paul loved to do. In later years, Paul and Essie loved to watch Jeopardy, and they kept saying how they wanted their grandchildren to participate or compete in Jeopardy, which someday, maybe, who knows, they will do. Kylie has a favorite joke, which I never heard actually, but Grandpa told her a joke which she used to great effect in school, and that was very positive. And they remember all the swim lessons at Grandma and Grandpa's house with Mr. Ken in their big pool, and the grandparents there, and these are really terrific memories that they all had. I need to tell you, and Gila already started, what it was like to be a colleague of Paul's studying together. Paul had a love for Jewish tradition, and you're going to hear from Camille, and you'll understand a lot more about where Paul came from. He had a love for Jewish tradition, but not in it's funny, a great love for Jewish tradition, but in a non-traditional way. And as a person who studied together for literally 25 years, We've gone through the 5 books of Moses, through the Torah, almost 4 times. So through each of these cycles, we get to re-encounter the same narratives, the same stories. And over time, you see a progression in all of our views. And what I noticed about Paul in particular was how moved he was, how affected he was by the grandeur of the biblical narrative. How this is his story. He took these stories very, very personally. He didn't always agree with the Bible's point of view, and I would always challenge my students and ask, why is this in the Torah? What was the intent behind this story? And sometimes Paul could be very critical because he didn't always agree with the ethics that were expressed in his view in that Torah. Now that's an amazing statement, to criticize or critique the Torah on its own ethics. But Paul had such a, I said at the beginning, an uprightness about him. Such a respect for human dignity and equality. And an expectation that everyone around him would uphold that standard of justice. And so when he saw the Torah, and I can give you passages, but I won't, when he saw the Torah act in a very particularistic or even selfish manner, he was outraged. Outraged in a way you can only be outraged with someone you love. Because you know the worst sin is indifference. He was not indifferent. He cared so much. And that rectitude, that moral uprightness, that clarity about who he is and what he stood for in his life, that's what we call in Hebrew a Yerusha. A Yerusha is an inheritance. It's something you wish to bequeath, an ethical teaching, a message you wish to bequeath to future generations. And I believe that is precisely what Paul, who was so meticulous about everything in his life, he left very meticulous instructions about today, right down to the pine box. That's the Yerusha that he wishes to leave you children. That's the inheritance he wishes to bequeath to you. What we say when a righteous person passes is we say, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. May the memory of the righteous be for a blessing. Mark Hamilton.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Mark.
So as Rabbi Silver was telling his stories, he kept on telling one story after another that I was going to say, but I think most of you, I think most of you know that I'm Roberta's husband, and we've been married almost 25 years. So that's, I've known Paul about the same amount of time that the rabbi has. It's always funny when we come together to celebrate death. In today's modern world, we hear so much about death, every day, whether it's across the world with a bomb going off or across the country with a tornado, that sometimes we get a little numb to it. But certainly when it hits close to home with a family member, a neighbor, or a loved one, we all suffer through it. We can't help but suffer through it, as the tears today's show. But of course, today is not just about coming here to shed tears, but it's also to celebrate Paul's life. And so, as I tried to think of some of the things that personally I would say, the rabbi knows, of course, but Paul went to Torah study twice a week. Once was with the rabbi, and once was with another group of people from the rabbi. So he would always compare and contrast
Now
the
that I never
Tuesday
heard.
versus Thursday. Like I said, I've known Paul for over 25 years, and I was comparing and contrasting that. My father and my two sisters are in the back. Our father passed away a little bit more than 20 years ago, and so if you do the math, you would know that I actually knew Paul for almost as long as I knew my father. And so certainly a lot of, he was certainly not a father figure to me, but he was always, so many interesting relationships. And this is, of course, about Paul, not my father, but I wanted to bring it up because Roberta and Lucy, to the grandchildren, you will all remember Paul 20 years from now. So those memories don't fade. I do have a few stories about Paul, and I'll try to share just a few, but I studied in college math and computer science, and Paul would always point out to the grandchildren, well, whatever you do, make sure that you study math and science, because that can, you can do anything. You can be a chemical engineer, you can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer, or a real estate broker. But Paul also, when we first met, I was working in the field of computer science and software development, and so Paul very proudly brought out one day, very early on, or at his house, he shared that he had gone to night school and taken a class in computer science. And so he had brought out his computer program that he had written. And of course, it wasn't on a laptop or on a computer that you have today. It was on the old ribbon feed paper, so very faded on the sort of white and green. And he took it out and walked through every instruction. And of course, I was an expert in computer programming, so he wanted my advice. Was this a good computer program, and would I have done it the same way? So he brought that up, I think, with Evan as well, when Evan was taking a computer science class in high school. Paul was always, very loving, very caring to all of his extended family. But certainly, certainly the love is the rabbi had said that was so special to him, and what really made his life was seeing the grandchildren. So we would have Lucy and Sam would come over with Kylie and with Lindsay often. When Camille went off to college, thanks to that modern age of computers, we would still use Skype, and so here Camille would appear, on the computer screen, and Paul would just marvel and say, "It's so amazing. It's like she's right here, and I can hear her more clear than if she was on the phone." We would talk, and so a lot of good memories there of Paul, of their pool, certainly going over there in swimming, and he will certainly be very fondly remembered. Some of you here have known Paul only a short time, and Roberta asked me to specifically thank Andy, thank Joseph, and thank Carmi that helped him over the last several weeks to be as comfortable as possible during the last days of his life when he was in the hospital and in the nursing home. So the three of you touched our lives and Paul's lives very much. To others who've known him for 60 or 70 years, or who are his neighbors or knew him in church or through the family, thanks for coming as well. And Temple. Camille or Evan, did we decide who's going next?
My first and foremost, my strongest impression of my grandfather, of Paul, is that of a wise man. I've been blessed to see him almost every day of the past 4 years, and a good number of days before that. But over the past couple of years, we'd settled into a very good routine where every day when I came home from school, he'd be sitting in the kitchen table, and I'd ask him how he was doing, and he would ask me how my day was. And every day, he would ask me about my classes, what I was taking, and he was always so, not concerned, but so interested in what I was studying at school and with my education and what I was learning. I remember specifically last year when I was studying American history, I was studying things he had lived through, and he would talk to me and give me his personal anecdotes, and he was always he loved to talk to me and would love to talk to me about my school. And I just remember being time and time again so impressed with how knowledgeable and how smart he was. Specifically, I guess this must have been last summer, but I attended Torah study with him. We've talked about that a lot. But I remember sitting there watching him debate the Torah with myself, debate it with my rabbi, debate it with the people around him. Not only was I impressed with his passion, but with how knowledgeable he was. And there he was, a man of probably 88 or 89 at the time, and still striving for mastery of the Torah, still trying to learn, still trying to better himself. And that's very much resonated with me. This concept that he learned throughout his life with a passion, and that's something I'm going to carry with me for the rest of my life. So thank you for that, Grandpa.
My grandfather has just been such a large presence in my life for the last 22 years since I was born. And when I was a child, he was really a larger-than-life figure. I think it was a combination of these stories he would tell that would span everything from things he'd done last week to things that happened in what seemed like just the farthest possible time away to me when I was a small child. And just like my brother was saying, he always had such an intelligence that I think, especially when I was young, was so impressive to me. As everyone has spoken about the Torah study that I started going, I think every break I had when I was 12, he would recruit me to come with him to either Tuesday or Thursday Torah sessions. And when we were just looking for things in his house, we found an algebra book that my brother and I had used. And I remembered that he would help us with school, and if he ever thought that he didn't know anything as well as he should, he would buy the same book to teach himself. So he made sure that he was kind of up to the standards that he thought he needed to be able to tell us what we needed to know. So as a child, it was just such an image that I thought I needed to strive for, to be this wonderful, larger-than-life figure when I was an adult too. And it was a lot to live up to. And it still is a lot to live up to, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to be the person that my grandfather was. But as I got older, I got to have this wonderful, more complex view of him. And I think the first thing that I really got when I was older is the love that he shared with my grandmother. Because as a small child, you don't necessarily recognize that so concretely. But the older I've gotten, I just recognize how special it was that they shared 60 years of their life together. Sorry. And they loved each other so much, and they would. He would always say what I would say every time I hung up the phone the last 4 years, "I love you, Grandpa." And most of the time he would just say, "Thank you, goodbye," and hang up the phone. But every once in a while he would say, "Well, Camille, I love you too, and I don't tell you so often because I don't want it to not mean anything. I want it to be really meaningful every time I say that." And that was exactly the relationship him and my grandmother had, that it wasn't necessarily very demonstrative, but it was so deep. And I hope that someday I'll have a relationship like that with someone in my life, and that if it lasts even a small portion of 20 years, I will be such a fortunate woman. And then aside from that love, I began to recognize that while in some ways he truly was a perfect human being, there were areas where he wasn't, and he began to show that to me with the stories he told. And Rabbi touched on this a little bit, but one that he really liked referencing was that his first year of medical school, when he was going to the track so much, he actually flunked out And he had to go ask a favor of the dean to let him come back the next year because he had not been studying. There was one test. He said he was doing well in all his classes, but one test he didn't study for and didn't do so well. And I just recognized that this man who I had always looked up to as this perfect person had also perhaps made a mistake or two along the way. And that's such a nice lesson to learn, I think, when you're going through stages in your life where you don't always do everything perfectly, that things can still work out and you can still have the most lovely family and rewarding career and just really wonderful life, even if there's a few slips and missed turns. So all of that, I guess, really is to say that he showed me that I think what was important to him and what he taught both his daughters and I think his grandchildren to be important was that family and love and learning come before anything else, and that sharing that with the rest of the world. And on the topic of family, what Rabbi referenced is that this is a book, both family and learning, that his grandfather wrote called Candid Reflections about different topics in Judaism. And he was so proud of the fact that his grandfather had been a published writer. I think that really spoke to the intellectualism in the family, even at that stage a long time ago. And there was a passage, it's the last passage in the book, and he would always bring it up whenever the topic of death came up. And so we realized that it had to be read at his funeral. And it goes, a meditation. Did you ever think, as the hearse rolls by, that it will not be long until you and I will go out riding in that big plumed hack and never remember coming back? Did you ever think, as you strive for gold, that a dead man's hand $1 won't hold? You can lie and cheat and strive and save, but you lose it all when you go to the grave. It would be better for you this very day to send some poor soul a cheap bouquet than a bushel of roses, white and red, to strew on his grave when he is dead. When you came to this world, you came naked and bare, without a trouble and without a care. And when you leave this world, you go to, you know not where. But if you're all right here, you'll be all right there. My grandfather was so more than all right here that I know that he's okay wherever he is now. I'm sorry, so thank you so much.
All your life you work to support your children, your family, your grandchildren. You support them in every way that you can, emotionally, physically. And you pour love into them. And then when you are old and sick, and life has taken things from you that you could not imagine happening, you have this well, this reservoir of love that you've accumulated. And that's exactly how Paul and Esther lived their lives. And the outpouring of love from their children and grandchildren, the care with which Roberta managed really the last couple years was so integrated into the process of life and death. You could not ask for a more wonderful family, more wonderful children and grandchildren. And to the men that you girls chose, such fine men, such good husbands and fathers. And Paul really believed that you girls, in his view, you girls would be just fine because you made such good families for yourselves. And I know he did not want to leave you. I know that very much. But he knew it was time, that his body was tired. It had given up. The soul, the spirit, does not ever give up, but the two must separate at some time. And he knows and you know that he's all right and that you're all right. And that the legacy that he bequeaths to you will be eternal through your love. In that vein, we open the brown prayer books once again, and Cantor is going to come over here and stand by me. We're going to find page 18. Paul's Hebrew name was Pinchas ben Avraham a Cohen Vebela, and he was very proud to be Ben Avraham, to be the son of his father, whom he missed his whole life. Would you please rise now as we turn to page 18 and recite the El Malei Rachamim.
Shalom al mishkavo v'nomar Amen.
O compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to the soul of Paul Kahan, Pinchas ben Avraham Kohen Vebela, who has now entered eternity. Master of motherly love, sheltered by your divine wings, may he be bound up in the bond of eternal life. The eternal God is now his inheritance. May he rest in peace, as we all say.
Amen.
Congregation, please be seated.
Ladies and gentlemen, here in just a few moments, we're going to proceed over to Graveside for interment services. The graveside is located just about a 75-yard walk, if that. It's right behind the large chapel. So for those of you who would like to walk over to Graveside, I'd like to invite you to. For those of you who are parked right over here near the gazebo, I'm going to ask that you'll follow behind the funeral coach or park in front of one of the spots there in front of the waterfall there. As we do have another service coming in, I would not want your car to get parked in as we go over for Graveside services. I'd like to also ask you to take your brown prayer booklets, as we'll be using them over at Graveside for Kaddish prayer on pages 31 and 32.